Page 32 is the energy-intensive trade-exposed industry leakage study. This was an assembly proposal. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Assembly approved $500,000 from the AB 32 cost of implementation account for a one-time study to conduct on the effects of cap and trade on energy-intensive industries. And the study of indirect effects, just for some context, is the effects of potentially higher electricity costs rather than just higher costs associated with direct emissions from a facility. And so the Assembly adopted $500,000 to better understand which industries are potentially trade exposed as a result of some higher costs related to cap and trade.
And what is your take on that proposal?
And we recommend going with the Assembly version. We think the study would help achieve the legislative goals of directing auction revenues that go to the utilities to trade exposed industries and limit the amount of leakage associated with the cap and trade program.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Was it contemplated that the return of cap and trade funds to residential, commercial, and industrial entities would require funding to implement the program?
My understanding is sort of when that language was put in there that there was not, that the analysis maybe did not include those types of costs for that study. However, we do believe that a better understanding of which industries are potentially exposed to this type of leakage would help the state better offset some of those potential effects.
But one could make the argument that the Air Resources Board could make these decisions using existing funds.
Perhaps, yes.
All right. Assemblywoman Weber.
Yes, we'll move the Senate version.
Okay, we have a motion for Senate. Ms. Bosler, didn't mean to cut you off. Any thoughts? Not in your proposal, I know that. Senate side, on page 32. 2-1 for the Senate version, 2-1. On page 33, we have the Southern California Mobile Lab Consolidation Project. This is the governor's proposal.
Yes, the governor's budget included $5.9 million for the Air Resources Board to really start the process of what is going to be a major undertaking, which is to modernize our existing laboratories that do all of the testing related to efficiency for our vehicle fleet in California. So this is something that there's been significant discussion about. There is some opportunity that has been provided by the closure of the Lanterman Center, but this is not to move the facility to that site, which is an existing state-owned property. We're continuing to evaluate appropriate sites. There are significant ongoing costs associated with the ultimate construction of this new facility, but this is something that has been discussed for many, many years now, and the current facility has really is beyond its useful life and is not sized appropriately for all of the additional work that the Air Board is now doing in this area.
Did the Air Board conduct a public site selection process?
Andrea Sharford, Department of Finance. Not with the Lanterman site, it's a state-owned property that would just be transferred. But however, after the Senate action was taken, Air Board, in collaboration with Department of General Services, issued a request for information to go out and see what kind of sites were available, what kind of response we would get. And we did get a couple responses. And as part of that, based on the responses, we issued an update to our budget proposal in the May revision to indicate that we would be looking at additional sites beyond Pomona.
Okay. And I think it was yesterday or the day before, they all sort of run together at this point, but I remember having a very intense conversation with regard to the vulnerability of the motor vehicle account. And here we've got a $3.8 million proposed hit to it. Your response?
This lab has been historically funded with multiple funding sources, the MVA being one of them. This is a one-time expenditure. Of course, there is continued the underlying fund condition in the MVA is a concern that will need to be addressed in future years, but this is a one-time allocation. In terms of the ultimate funding of the construction of this new facility, we're still developing a plan for that.
It's a big project, right?
It is a big project.
North of $250 million. Yes. Mr. Brown?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The Senate rejected the proposal and the Assembly approved the proposal. We have a compromise that we would like to offer, and that would be to approve $400,000 to assess the suitability of both sites that the administration has identified as potential sites for the lab, and would allow that process to move forward, but also direct the administration to return next spring with a long-term funding plan for the project. As you mentioned, there are concerns about the fund sources and their condition and their ability to support this project. So this compromise would allow the site selection process to potentially move forward, not approve the additional funding, and then direct the administration to come back.
Assemblywoman, your take on the compromise?
We haven't had a chance to look at the compromise, so we'll have to hold it over.
All right.
We'll look at it.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a
Yes,
question?
Assemblywoman.
So originally, 2 sites were contemplated, is that correct?
No, originally, it was just going to be the Pomona Lanterman site area.
So, okay, I'm just, because the governor suggested 200,000 for site selection, and now the compromise is 400,000 for site selection?
The 200,000 was under the assumption that they were just going to assess that one site, and now the compromise is to assess both sites, and so it would be twice the money to assess both of the sites.
Okay, good question, and we will move on as we consider the compromise further. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Page 34 is the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. Again, Ms. Bosler.
The Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan is an existing plan that's required by state law that the State Water Resources Control Board updates and maintains. It has not been updated for several years, and it is really critical to the ongoing management of the ecosystems in the Delta. The proposal is for $7.8 million, split roughly evenly, $3.7 million with the general fund and $4.1 million with the water rights fund.
Mr. Brown.
Both houses approved the funding level, but chose different funding sources. The Senate approved as proposed. The Assembly approved the funding all from the general fund. We're recommending Senate. We've consulted with both attorneys at the Water Board as well as with Ledge Council, and their take is that the share that designated for the Water Rights Fund is appropriate for this purpose, is designated for that purpose in statute. And the issue that you may have heard about has to do with some prior legal decisions, and our understanding is that that doesn't, the decision by the state Supreme Court is that this is an allowable use of fund. The question is whether the board can appropriately demonstrate that it split the amount associated with the water rights fee holders versus the pre-riparian, or the pre-1914 and riparian rights holders, and our review is that they've done so in like in a reasonable way.
So just to reiterate, you believe that the Water Rights Fund is an appropriate fund?
That's our understanding.
And secondly, by going with the Senate proposal, we could save $4.1 million general fund dollars.
That would be the effect.
All right, Assemblywoman Weber.
We're prepared to hold this over. We think our proposal, shifting it from one to the general fund, might be best, but we're still prepared and looking into it, so we're willing to hold it open.
All right, I hope we can convince you that the Water Rights Fund is appropriate.
You probably will. You're pretty convincing.
Thank you. All right, we have another LAO handout. This has to do with the, now moving forward, Department of Toxic Substances Control. Thank you. Ms. Ames, you're back. So if you could, thank you for the handout, and if you could start with the big picture,
Of course.
please.
Yes, I will move through this.
Not all pretty,
quickly
but big.
At a high level, but please feel free to ask questions or inquire for more details. If you look at page 1 of the handout, this just outlines the governor's January proposals, as well as the Senate and Assembly actions on those. You can see that it includes a hazardous waste reduction proposal, which is for 6 two-year limited term positions that would support some pilot scale projects to look at hazardous waste reduction. The Senate did reject that proposal on the basis that a policy committee had not looked at the goal of the 50% hazardous waste reduction goal and suggested that that would be an appropriate place to examine that. And then the second proposal, both houses did approve it. The Assembly approved as budgeted, and the Senate did approve these positions as permanent rather than limited term. If you take a look at the second page, this includes the May revision proposals from the governor's office. The ones outlined here are a total of 6.6 million and 46 positions. Some of these are new limited term positions, and some of them are existing positions that were redirected from federal funding sources to state funding sources. I won't go through each of those, but I'm happy to answer questions about them. You can see that the Assembly did approve all 4 of those as budgeted. The Senate did reject those based on a lack of adequate review time, since they did come in late with the May revision. The third page includes an action that the Senate took, which was to add language. This is budget bill language that would reduce the Department of Toxic Substance Control budget by 50% should they not deliver the 2 reports that are requested here as supplemental reporting language. The first report would be on the status of the permitting backlog and enforcement, among other things. And then the second report is the status of implementing the department's plan related to the excited enforcement order. If you turn to the next page, this is another action that the Senate took, which was to add language, and this would be trailer bill language that would establish an independent review panel. The panel would oversee the department's activities, and there's a lot of text here, but it does include several things that the other things the panel would do as well. It would report to the legislature and the governor every 90 days, specifically related to the permitting and enforcement backlog reductions, as well as the department's ability to meet legislative mandates. Secondly, it would oversee the department's establishment of an Office of Performance Accountability and Transparency. Third, it would make recommendations to improve the department's performance and the department's programs. And finally, the panel would review the reports that are being asked of the department through the supplemental reporting language, and the panel would also make suggestions on the required reporting of the department. On the final page, we do offer an LAO compromise between the actions of the 2 houses. The first component of the compromise is to approve the department's budget requests. We do find that the requests are reasonable. They have provided workload justification for them, and we think that these resources would help them address these documented workload needs and address some of the issues and problems that have been documented and that they're continuing to work through. The second component is to consider making certain positions permanent. We think that, for example, the Senate acted to make the permitting coordination and backlog support proposal positions be approved as permanent, and we find that these resources do address an ongoing workload. They are supported by an ongoing funding source, and making them permanent does give the department a better ability to recruit and retain staff. And it also does provide some stability to the program. The last component of our compromise is to adopt the Senate supplemental reporting language and the trailer bill language that would establish an oversight entity. We do find that this would provide the legislature with more information and could improve legislative oversight. We do note that the budget bill language as proposed could be difficult to implement, and it could affect the department's ability to carry out its mission. We note that the supplemental reports that are requested would be delivered in April of next year, which would be during the 16-17 budgeting cycle. And so the legislature could make changes to the department's budget based on those reports and findings at that time if it chose to do so.
Thank you for that overview. So we will continue to work toward a compromise. Thank you for your input here. Clearly, a challenged department in recent years with the recent decisions regarding the closure of Exide finally. So many communities have been more than challenged, but really seriously damaged among all the many aspects of the work of the department. I have to say, all the challenges and shortcomings notwithstanding, I was very pleased to see the great strides that the department made under the leadership of Debbie Raphael. She came from San Francisco. San Francisco grabbed her back. She's been a major talent in the area for a long time. And she gave a presentation to the Environmental Quality Committee about a year or so ago. She'd been on the job maybe 2-3 years, and it was really impressive. Without a note, she just gave us a complete overview of the problems, of the challenges, what she was doing. It was a brilliant presentation, and I know that we've had to move forward with her departure, and the new director also gave a presentation to the committee recently, and I don't know her background as well as I know Ms. Raphael's, but I did get a sense that she's committed, she is earnest, and her sleeves are rolled up. She wants nothing but to do the best job she can to get us moving in a positive way. So with all that said, a lot of details here, and I appreciate that the houses took very different actions, but it allowed us to come together through the conference process to find that compromise. Assemblyman Bloom.
Just want to add that Ms. Raphael was trained in Santa Monica, so it was the least you could expect from her.
I do have to acknowledge that. I do indeed. Thank you for it. So we'll move on to page 36. And this is the Tijuana River Valley Pilot Project and the Tire Cleanup Statute. Assembly proposal, Ms. Ames.
Yes, just as a way of a little bit of background, the Tijuana River does flow through Mexico and into California. Because of that, unmitigated solid waste on the Mexican side of the border can come into California, and one of the issues that that poses is with these tires. The Assembly did approve placeholder trailer bill language that would fund a pilot project allowing Cal Recycle to work with third parties, including nonprofits, to identify waste tire flows and conduct cleanup on both sides of the border. And they did provide an actual draft of that language recently, and unfortunately we haven't had a chance to review it particularly closely at this time. And so while the proposed activities might have merit at this time, we haven't had a lot of time to review the detail on the pilot projects, such as the expected results and the costs. And so we've recommended the Senate, but we will continue to review this information.
Thank you, Ms. Ames. I think one of the things that the Senate's considering is that the solid waste that needs mitigation coming within the river is more than just tires. And so it leads us down a path of further policy considerations. Do you want to add anything?
We're prepared to, if necessary, to hold this over. Obviously, there's a major problem once again with this situation with the Tijuana River, and we've had it for a number of years, and it continues to grow, even though much of the waste may be generated south of the border. It comes across because it knows no borders and basically contaminates the whole area in terms of the river and the ocean and other things like that. And so there's a great concern about this project. This would establish a border region solid waste working group, which would be a good group involving California and Mexico in terms of both regions working together to try to solve this and hopefully develop some kind of long-term solution, because we have talked about this issue for probably as long as I can remember in San Diego. And this hopefully is a first step to move in that direction, to form a working group that would hopefully develop a number of things. But I understand the need to want to hold it open in case there are other issues that might be included in other than just the tire waste. So we're prepared to hold it over, but
We'll
it
do
is a
that.
major problem and a major concern for the speaker.
All right, thank you, Assemblywoman. Page 37 is with regard to the public health goal statute, May revision proposal.
Yes, this is really a follow-up on last year's proposal to transfer the drinking water program from the Department of Public Health to the State Water Resources Control Board. When that was done, the public health goals became subject to Health and Safety Code Section 57004, which requires peer review of the scientific basis of any rule or standard. So this would lead to some public health goals being subject to 2 different scientific studies. And so in order to remove that duplicative provision, we've proposed trailer bill language to amend law, and that's the May revision proposal.
Thank you, Ms. Bosler. Ms. Ames.
Yes, this trailer bill language proposal also came in the May revise, and so similar comments as with the other language, but we do note that the Senate rejected it for similar reasons, and the Assembly did approve. At this time, we do think that it seems like a technical change and that it is duplicative.
Right, I think the Senate rejection was just lack of opportunity to review it fully, and having done so, I think we're much more comfortable with the Assembly version. Senator Lara?
I would move the Assembly version.
Thank you for that. So we have a motion, page 37. Senate is 2-1, and the 3-0.